Okay, we are live.
This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story, once a week. I'm Gerald.
I'm Remy.
Where's Anais? I always go last.
Yeah,
No.
we switched it this week for whatever reason. See, Gerald did the script this week. He threw in one corkscrew.
Yeah.
Okay, so where am I? Am I third?
You're after
Yeah.
Remy. Yeah.
Okay. News to me.
Take two.
Okay.
Take two.
Take two. Okay. This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story, once a week. I'm Gerald.
I'm Remy.
I'm Maya.
And I'm Anais. Bradbury challenge.
Oh, yeah. Good thing you can cut, huh?
Good thing I can cut. Just start
thing you
without laughing. It also sounds weird.
This week, before we get blah, 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 blah. Boy, and I put this live, didn't I? Before we get started, I want to announce a third new podcast. Well, no, it's a second podcast, but it's going to be our third podcast coming 2016. We are going to start the Bradbury Challenge with Gerald and a wonderful new addition, Chrissy Moss. She is going to be new to the Literary Roadhouse family. And what this podcast is, me and these amazing two adventurous writers are going to attempt the Bradbury Challenge, where Ray Bradbury said that you should write a new short story every week because you can't write 52 bad short stories. So we're going to each write a short story each week, talk about what it's like, talk about what works, what doesn't, and what we learn in the process.
I'm excited for that. I don't know if I could do what you guys are doing. You guys are very brave. So before we get
crazy.
Crazy, yeah. Before we get started with this episode, everyone should know that sometimes we slip into potty mouth, so we'll let you know in the show notes if this is explicit. If not, then go ahead and share it with your children, or share it even if you let them listen to potty mouth.
Otherwise, if you're me as a parent.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you how to parent.
This whole podcast's all twisted about.
Yeah, this is just going downhill real quick, isn't it?
Thrown us completely.
Okay, Gerald, rescue us.
Okay, here we go. Common sense. If you haven't read Happy Endings by Margaret Atwood and don't want to be spoiled, pause the podcast, read the story. This is a very short story. In fact, it's a piece of flash fiction at around 1,300 words. I really wanted to feature a piece of short fiction from Margaret Atwood, since we're reading her The Heart Goes Last for our Literary Roadhouse Book Club. Go to our website for details of how to join in. So come on, you need to do this. It's an example, a short story of metafiction, a story about stories. Atwood opens with a typical boy meets girl and they live happily ever after story. But then she twists this, offering 5 other versions of the story, which are far more interesting than the first. But in the final analysis, they all have one ending, and it's the same in each case. However, through her writing, she shows how the parts between the boy meets girl and the ending can vary wildly.
Okay, so where do we want to start with this thing? Let's start with just top level. How did everybody feel about this story?
I don't really know how to feel about this story, right? In quotes. So, put it this way. I feel like if this is the only thing you ever read from Atwood, that would be a disservice. But it's kind of like a nice diversion from people who are her fans to get a little more taste of where she's at. That's all I could really say. Yeah.
Yeah, I quite enjoy it. I think it's interesting and written in her very fantastic style. And it's a change. It's something a little bit different from the short stories we normally read on this podcast.
Yeah, I was a little confused by it at first. And, this is one of those stories that when I read it, I thought, oh, this is interesting. But the more I thought about it, the more I dissected it in my mind, the more I liked it. I liked it quite a bit, but at first I was not sure how to exactly approach this story. I would say it's probably my first metafiction I've read, so that was totally new for me. How about you, Remy?
I love the idea, the concept, and the structure of it, but I dislike the writing itself.
Would you guys call this experimental fiction?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's not, it doesn't have, it's not like a complete single short story. It doesn't have a start, a middle, and an end. It's lots of little vignettes, lots of little stories, all based around the same sort of thing. And as a reader, it gets you to think about stories, to think about what makes a good story and what doesn't make a good story. So I think that's, it's good from that perspective, but it is very, very different to the normal sort of things that we read here.
So I have a question for all three of you. What do you guys think this story is about?
I think it's probably about getting readers to understand how writers write.
Okay. How about for you, Anais?
Yeah, there's that element of it, and so
One second. What's going on in the background?
It's Rami.
I know, but I'm saying that politely. I'm glaring at him, but I'm really pretending like it could be anybody.
Sorry, I was typing. I didn't realize my mic was so sensitive.
Okay, Anais.
Okay,
I'm just trying to save your audio. Sorry.
So I agree with Gerald that, was it just Gerald? Yeah, that it's about stories. The idea of beginning to the end, how you get there, but she pairs it up nicely with the journey of life as well, or really more like a romantic story. So she tells you what it is. She has that line which is, so much for endings. Beginnings are always more fun. True connoisseurs, however, are known to favor the stretch in between, since it's the hardest to do anything with. And that's true for both life and stories. So she's kind of pairing that up nicely.
How about you, Remy?
Yeah, I think she summarized it in the end as well, where you can control what happens in between, because the ending especially is out of your hands. So at least you can work with what you can control, which is the how and the why things happen.
This story reminds me, the picture within the picture within the picture, or if you're in a hangout and you go screen share, and it's like Inception on you. That's what this story reminds me of. On one hand, I think the story is about life, but on the other hand, I actually think there is a beginning, middle, of an end. I think the story is the story of a writer coming up with a story. So you have the beginning of what the writer thinks is the story. You have the middle of the writer developing the story, and then you have the final version of the story. But the story itself is of the writer writing a story, which I found really interesting and a little confusing. Much like the picture within a picture makes me confused. But once I started thinking of it that way, I found myself enjoying it a lot more and finding a lot more nuance that I didn't necessarily find the first time I read it.
Mm-hmm. And she's also introducing the nuance that, so I agree with you, it's the kind of like a writer writing a story, and she's doing the plot, which she says is and what, and a what, and a what, but then she ends with, now try how and why. And I think if you wanted to, ending F is slightly critical of the type of genre fiction that's all plot without a how and why, because she's like, where she says you can make genre revolutionary and marry a counter-espionage agent, see how far that gets you, which nobody says see how far that gets you genuinely, right?
There's a lot of snark in this story.
Yeah.
I think this is probably the first story where in my comments in the margins I actually wrote out LOL multiple times. This is a very snarky story.
Yeah.
About in the first story where everything was stimulating and challenging.
Over and over stimulating and challenging.
Yeah, but it really wasn't at all.
Yeah.
No, not at all. And I love that they wait until they can afford to have live-in help before they have children. Just the way it's stated, it's like, eventually when they can afford live-in help, they have children. And I'm just like, oh wow, that is just such like a certain type of person. And it just totally cracked me up.
As you guys just reflected on that, both of you, I had like a whoa moment. A and F, the closer you get to the ends, is more boring. The middle is the truly flavorful, savoring part, like she says at the end. It's like
Mind
C,
blown.
D, E. Yeah, it's the middle ones that are better, the ones that are a little bit more balanced. The first one's boring, and the last one's kind of boring. Who cares if he's like a revolutionary, right?
And ridiculous too. It's you
Of
know,
course, he's ridiculous.
yeah,
Good characters.
she progresses the story from the sort of simple boy meets girl, blah blah blah, to a slightly more complicated story, and then a little bit more and a little bit more, and then she just, for the last one, she just sort of takes it way out there and say, what about this? Try that.
Yeah. I also like that the
So is
stories
it-
build on each other. Everything refers back to A. Everything goes back to A.
Oh.
Of course it's going to end in A. Well, A happened, but then that didn't work out, so now we're going to get to, what, C or whatever?
Is it supposed to be like pitches that she's giving to a publisher or editor?
I think that is for the reader to determine. I don't think we know what this is supposed to be. I think that, has Margaret Atwood actually explained this story? She's not normally an explainer. I don't think so. And so I think it really is, this story leaves a lot of room for interpretation. A lot of room for interpretation. And I can see how you could read it that way, Remy.
Well, I didn't know how to, well, initially I didn't think that, but then when she goes into the later letter versions and she's like, well, especially the F1 where, you can still do this, but then it'll go back to that and stuff. Then I thought, okay, maybe she's going through rough drafts rather than just simply writing different versions of the story.
Yeah, I think that reading of it, Rami, is correct. I feel like that's it's like meta, it's like an inception of meta, right? So there is that aspect of it where it's like you're in a writer's head as they're writing and they're drafting. And I think we could all basically agree, we can vote, B and C are the best, right? B is where Mary falls in love with John, makes him dinner, he comes over twice a week,
Well, I mean, that could be, what is your, if we each had to pick our favorite version, what would it be?
A.
Wow, that says so much. Wow. My whole understanding of Remy has just been illuminated.
I like C because there's the motorcycle in it. So
Margaret Atwood as an illuminated text. Great.
I think for me, B and C are sort of neck and neck, but B wins out for the one line, which is Mary collects all the sleeping pills and aspirin she can find and takes them in half a bottle of sherry. You can see what kind of woman she is by the fact it's not even whiskey. Those are my favorite.
You know what? That totally was a great line.
Yeah.
My favorite was C. I loved C the most. There was something very snarky about C that I appreciated, especially because Mary, who is only 22, feels sorry for him because he's worried about his hair falling out. I found that very humorous. I liked how it ended. I felt like it had the most... I mean, one of the things I noticed as I read these is it starts out very distant, and by C you actually start getting a sense of character, a deeper sense of character. You get a little bit of taste of it in B, but C is where she starts to flesh out what people want and what they kind of feel like as humans, and I think that's why I like C the most. How about you, Gerald?
Yeah, I think so. I think by the time you get to D, which is the House by the Coast and Tidal Wave one, it's sort of going away from boy meets girl and that's a story, and then it's sort of boy meets girl, but there's all this stuff happening as well, and I think it sort of goes a bit more sort of crazy from there. But I like the fact that she does that. She does that progression from the simple story through more interesting stories to adding more interest, which makes it more ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, I would argue that B also has a lot of character development, but it's very Mary-centric, because you get the idea that Mary's like a romantic idealist. She's latching on to this. All her coworkers are like, girl, he's not worth it. He's using you, and she resists that. But I think also possibly why I liked B so much, and this kind of is like a teaser trailer for the book club, is in B, Mary is a lot like Charmaine in The Heart Goes Last. So I'm like, oh, I've been reading about this woman who drinks sherry instead of whiskey.
I didn't think of that, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, Mary is Charmaine in B.
Oh my
I didn't read
goodness.
it, so I can't relate. But I know Maya, especially, or Gerald, or whomever, you're gonna get on my case for liking A because it's trite or antiquated or whatnot. However, and maybe this is because I've been exposed to like the same themes in other situations or stories or movies or whatever, but I feel like B and C are also not necessarily novel. You know, I've heard these stories many times of the guys who use the woman and she goes into depression, or the person who's self-conscious about getting old, so he finds a younger woman and you know, she might be interested in someone else. So I feel like those were maybe not equally as overused, but it wasn't very new to me.
Well, I think one of the things that this story shows me is, like, all these stories are very stereotypical. Like, all of them kind of exemplify the idea that there are no new stories, or that there's only 7 plots, like that whole theory, that there are only 7 plots in the entire world, and that all the stories in the world are based on, at their core, they're all these 7 plots. And I feel like this is kind of exploring that. Like, you have the really basic story, which is like one of the 7 plots, and then you see this writer trying to expand on it, trying to make it different, trying to figure out how to make it a story, and in the end kind of saying it's all going to end in A. Like, everything is A, and the only way you can make it novel is the details in the middle. And that's something I appreciate. I think if the examples had been more novel, I think that message would have gotten lost in the story. I think we would have gotten so involved with the story that we would have missed the point of the story. And by making the story so bland and so snarky and so self-aware, like essentially I can hear Margaret Atwood chuckling saying, yeah, this one's crap. By making it that way, it brings that other message up to the top level rather than the story being at the top level.
And I think also, even though Rami might like story A better, I think what she's showing is that here's a story, but there's no conflict, so it doesn't make it a good story for a writer, and it doesn't make a good story for a reader. So let's add some conflict, and let's add other things, and she keeps sort of adding stuff into that basic story.
You know, I wasn't surprised that Remy liked A, because he's a romantic at heart. He's an old-fashioned romantic who reads parables and believes in the best in humanity. I'm like, where is this boy, and what planet did he come from?
That's really
I'm living on my own planet still.
The planet of good boys. But one of the things that I like about this is that A story is like, that is Cinderella. Like, you meet your prince, you get married, you have the happy family. That is like your happy ending story. And by C, you find out that that happy ending story isn't a happy ending. Like, it's boring. And when it's boring, like, you got to go out and find a Mary.
Are you saying Rami is a Disney prince?
Oh, totally. Like he's like the next Disney prince.
I wish I could be.
Rides up on a white horse. I'll save you.
Exactly. You know, that whole chivalry and knights.
Yeah. It's overrated.
I don't think so.
not true.
You know, I feel like E is the one that probably most people are going to actually experience. Because it's Fred has a bad heart. The rest of the story is about how kind and understanding they both are until Fred dies. Then Madge devotes herself to charity work. It can be like Madge, cancer, guilty and confused, bird watching.
You know what? E, I just realized, okay, A is a fairy tale. E is a literary novel.
Basically, yes. The bird watching gives it away.
The bird watching gives it away. And I love how it's not like incensed. It's just Madge, Cancer, guilty and confused bird watching.
Yeah.
Like, I have notes like this in my folder.
Is this really how people come up with stories now?
Oh, yeah. Kind of.
No, I think it depends on the writer.
And Maya, do you
know
really
what?
think...
This brainstorming feels really familiar to me. Like, when I come up with a story, a lot of times I'll come up with, like, a main idea or a main thought or a theme. And I'll gradually build on it bit by bit, and it grows. And much in the way that this does. Now, what I find interesting is they grow, but then D and E are very short. They're both very short. Those are like your cast-off ideas. Well, I could do this, but I'm not going to. And it kind of broke the pattern, because I kind of, like, at first when I was reading it, I thought, oh, this is interesting. Each story's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden they got small again. What do you think she was doing with that?
Yeah, I think that was deliberate. I think that's because as a writer, you take the basic theme, boy meets girl, blah, 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 and then you say, well, let's make it a little bit more interesting. So you add all these extra things, and then as you develop the story, you think, well, we could do this and we could throw that in, and you sort of, I don't know, when you find something isn't working, you sort of put a lot of effort into something like story B, and then you put a bit more effort into story C, and then you think, oh, what the hell, you know, let's put about this and let's do that, and so I think what she's saying is that whatever story you write, and however interesting or complicated or whatever things you put in there, it's all the same. Boy meets girl and they die, and that's the sort of, you know, that's a central tenet to the whole story. I think that
yeah,
and it's the how and the why which is important, but the plot of the meeting and the dying is it's meet in the middle, which is the important stuff.
But Maya, do you really think that these 6 ideas capture every possible story that you can have? I don't think so.
No. This story is one. This is like the Romeo and Juliet, the boy meets girl story. I don't actually know all the 7 plots. I know the theory. There, you know, boy meets girl. There's a tragedy. You know, but the idea is that there are 7 core plots, and that when you drill any story down to its most basic elements, it's one of those 7. It's very hard to make a novel plot. But I haven't studied that theory extensively. Have either of you?
Yeah, isn't it a sort of man versus man, man versus environment? Is that the sort of thing?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's like really drilled down. It's an interesting theory. I read it years ago. I really should go back and reread it.
Yeah, but so I read maybe like last year or earlier 20 master plots. So this one's
that's
now,
another version of it, but it's got 20, huh?
But to that book, there's an introduction that basically talks about the 7 plots, talks about these 20 master plots, talks about one that's like in the 60s, like how many plots there could be. And then there's, is it Aristotle? I'm probably getting that wrong, who says there's only 2. It's complicated.
Yes.
That's it. You know? So I feel like that number really depends on how you want to dissect things, right? Because I feel like you could just be like, oh, this is this with these 20 different exceptions. And somebody else could say those 20 exceptions is enough to make it its own category. So it's sort of, yeah. But I do think, I think the reason why the 7 sticks is because 7, I think, is a number that we can grasp easily.
7's a magic number.
Yeah. Hold on, before we get into that, I'm pretty sure it's 6. I've been counting just to make sure.
No, it is 7. It is 7 major plots. Although I like the Aristotle too, because I write tragedy.
No, I mean in the story itself, the letters go up to 6.
You know what? Are we really going to sit here and debate whether it's 6 plots or 7 with the dude that doesn't
I don't care. But into like 7, the importance of 7, but she uses 6.
No. Rami, you're counting how many stories are in happy endings. We're not talking about happy endings anymore. We're talking about the
theory of the 7 plots.
Yeah, I just pulled it up on Wikipedia. It's Christopher Booker who wrote the 7 basic plots, Why We Tell Stories. It's Overcoming the Monster, Rags to Riches, The Quest, Voyage and Return, Comedy, Tragedy, Rebirth.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wikipedia.
And it would be really hard to think of a story that doesn't fit one of those. Like, any story that I think of off the top of my head definitely fits one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because those are the main questions of being human. Those are like the natural things that we're curious about. Those are the natural things that we strive for. And they're really common experiences. And one thing I've always wondered, and I've never gotten a good answer, is whether that is Western-centric or whether those are universal. Now, on the podcast, we've read some fiction from other countries, from various nationalities, and it all of them still seem to be fairly traditional stories, even the more experimental ones. And so I think that would be interesting to explore over the next, upcoming year or so.
Yeah, though even just like looking at this, some of these I'm already like scratching my head. See, you can dissect anything because, for example, he has the quest and voyage and return. But a quest without a return, what was the point, right? Like the
sometimes you don't have to come back.
I guess, but like okay,
you can go on a quest and just keep questing forever and ever and ever.
Yeah, but the examples are like the Wizard of Oz. She comes back. Lord of the Rings. They go back to the Shire. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows has a full circle to it as well. It's like,
I think more on the emphasis. Is the emphasis on the going and the coming, or is the emphasis on the journey itself?
Yeah.
I would say in the ones you stated, most of them, the coming back was almost like a punctuation point. It wasn't like a big, huge point of the story. Yeah, it was a point of the story, but like really the point was the journey of the Yellow Brick Road and learning how to be independent and becoming a young lady. Yeah. See, I'm using euphemisms. I'm getting better.
Remy just said the Odyssey, but according to this, the Odyssey would be voyage and return.
Yeah. No,
because the whole point of this voyage is that he wants to come back, right? God, it's been so long since I read the Odyssey. I loved that book as a kid.
I was including that in the voyage and return category as well.
Oh man, you know what's funny? The Hobbit is under voyage and return. Lord of the Rings is under the quest.
Oh, that's funny.
I guess you have to read the book.
We're dorks. Okay, we're totally in the weeds here, and we probably lost half our audience. So
no, I think it's interesting, but yeah, let's go back.
Do you guys have any other thoughts about the structure of the story? Because the structure of the story was interesting. The structure of the story, I would say, is a huge point of the story. We've read some stories that were a little bit different structure, but I think they would have equally worked if they had been written in a more traditional format. For me, I don't think this would have worked at all if it was written more normally. How about you guys?
No, definitely. It had to be in the form of, here's a story, and by the way, and I like the fact that she did A, B, and C. It's because it in a way it is that simple, isn't it? There's a story, and here's a different story, and so she's making that even more clear by giving them letters, and it's that whole sort of here's a different story, and then at the end it's no, they're all the same.
Yeah, I think this is one of the cases of having an experimental format that is working because it adds something to the story. I think sometimes we experiment with fiction just because we want to experiment with fiction, but it literally could have been written in another way. And this is a story where I think this is what I would strive for. Like if I was writing an experimental story, I would want whatever experiment I was doing to be so integrated into the story that was the only way to write it, and then I would know that I was doing a good job, essentially, at least for me. How about you, Anais?
Yeah, no, I agree. You can't have this in a traditional story format because then you miss the whole point, which is comparing and contrasting the different stories.
Anything else you guys want to talk about with this? You want to get into language? I know Ramy said he didn't care for the language that much. What didn't you like about it, Ramy?
I'll tell you.
Okay, let me just pull up a chair.
All right, are you ready to do this? Go in. No, it's not really anything severe. Well, okay. First of all, for part A, and I guess maybe this is where the language warning comes in. What does it mean, and forgive me also for maybe not being too experienced in this area, to have a challenging sex life? Like, I understand stimulating, and I understand challenging and stimulating hobbies, but what is a challenging, like, why is, I don't understand.
Why is challenging a thing? Oh, God.
Something you need to conquer?
Remy, sometimes when a boy likes a girl, no, I'm kidding. Gerald is red. Gerald's face is so red. He looks like a tomato.
No, I understand stimulating, but is challenging the right word here?
Yes, if you're lucky.
All right, fine. But I mean, that's something minor. I was just curious. You still haven't told me, but maybe we can do that.
Okay, what I would say is challenging avoids routine.
No,
how would you say
that's
this in a polite way that won't get as explicit? I'm trying really hard here, Anais. Like, if you have a stimulating but non-challenging sex life, you're probably going to be doing like the same things on a regular basis, and eventually someone that's challenging is going to come along and they're going to look really interesting and curious. You're going to get curious. But if you're with somebody that you can try new stuff all the time and you can push each other to try things and explore things and feel different things, then that's challenging yourselves to keep getting better.
I guess I would lump that under stimulating still, because if it does become routine, then it ceases to be stimulating. So then you do have to try. Whatever. Anyway, this isn't minutia. All right, but thank you for that. The second thing, I don't enjoy writers using vulgarity unless it's for the purpose of further illustrating a character who might be ribald, like the character's cursing in dialogue or something. Because the description in B of John, he has sex with her, but she says the F word. Like, I didn't think that was necessary.
I'm trying so hard. The Disney prince cannot. He's just...
Does not compute. Okay. Does not compute. Okay.
Overall, with the writing, I feel like I like the structure, but I feel like it had so much more potential. Like, there was more that could have been done with it. Like, I would have preferred. Like, I don't want to, give criticism without giving alternatives. So, for example, like, maybe actually give me other stories rather than just making it seem like you're scratching notes down. Or go further into each plot, and make it more interesting that way. I that's why I feel like it had potential, but I didn't think it lived up to it.
Okay.
Just real quick, I just gotta challenge Remy on this on the F-bomb.
Thank you, because I want to defend the F word. Of course, it would be me, but it comes from it's more stronger coming from you.
Well, this is my throwdown music. Yeah, no. It's because in B, John is doing that to Mary, and there is a connotation there. They're not making love. He's not passionately into her. What he is doing is F word. Like that is exactly what it is. That captures
there is a difference between F wording. Yes. See, I'm getting better here. I'm working on it. It's killing me. It is killing me, Anais.
No, I understand.
There's a nuance to that.
I completely understand the difference, but the story was being told through a third-person narration. If she was going to say, okay, John looked at it as just like...
It was... B was told in an omniscient point of view.
Okay,
and the way that we know how he feels about Mary is partially... that sentence says a lot about how he feels about Mary. The fact that they don't have sex, they're not making love, everything that in reference to him is very coarse and very harsh, and everything in reference to Mary is very desperate and very confused and very grasping. And for me personally, because I've heard this from other people, and I know you're not the only person, Remy, a lot of people bristle at the F word. A lot of people bristle at it. A lot of people feel like it takes them out of the story. A lot of people feel like it shouldn't be used or it's unnecessary. Personally, I feel like overuse of any word, any of them, is lazy writing. But I feel like the reason why the F word takes people out some stories is because it's a really strong word. It has a really strong connotation. And used correctly, it's a very powerful word. And so I'm not of the school that it shouldn't be used. I'm of the school that it needs to be used for a specific purpose. And this is actually one of the purposes that I'm all for. I very rarely use it in writing. But this is one of the situations where I feel like it is the appropriate word. For me, there wouldn't, any other word would have changed how I felt about the relationship between those two people. And by using that word, it highlighted the emotional imbalance of that relationship. How about you, Gerald? How do you feel about it? Like, I know you like a lot more polite fiction than I do sometimes. And so, how do you feel about like coarse language in literature?
What is polite fiction?
You like your non-sexist male protagonist. You.
Yeah, well, sometimes. Yeah, it's like you. I mean, she carefully chose this word. She didn't just throw it in as because she liked to use it. It was carefully chosen and put in there for a purpose. I agree with you, Maya. There's a word that begins with C, which I do not like. I do not use. I hate to hear and see. And so, for some people, the F word is a bit like that. So you can understand sometimes that that word appearing in front of them would shock them. And I'm the same with that other word. It's only that other word. There's nothing else bothers me particularly.
So I think the difference is in the impact that it had on the story, because personally I feel like it could have worked without it, because we're basically beat over the head and she hammers the point home that yes, he's objectifying her with all of the other details, but I guess like you're saying, like it wouldn't like having sex wouldn't have worked versus that, but I think it could have.
Yeah. I think this is something that, there are just so many views on it. Like Gerald just said, he has a problem with the C word. I actually have a poem that the C word is in the title that I wrote. Yeah, I don't use that word. So for me to put that in this poem was a big deal, but it was appropriate for the piece. And so, it's definitely, there are certain words that are really strong words. I don't think they shouldn't be used, but I think you should think about them. Like, is this word adding something to the story? Is it me being lazy? Is there another word that would work better? Or is this the best, most correct word? And for me, I like really precise writings. And one thing I've noticed about Atwood is she's very precise. And so it isn't a matter, when you're talking about a really precise writer, they're not even so much looking for a word that works. They're looking for the best version of the word that works for that. So, yeah, she probably could have made it work with a different word. But I agree with her that this is the most appropriate word for what's being said. But in another writer's hand, it could have been very sloppy. If the rest of the piece hadn't been so precise, and then having that word just dropped in the middle would not have necessarily worked. At least for me, it wouldn't have.
Yep.
And now everybody's quiet.
That's it.
Yeah. All right, no, that's
and
fine.
We managed to have that conversation without giving explicit warning. I'm very proud of all of us, especially me.
What about the other part where she could have delved into the other stories more rather than making it just rough drafts that she's thinking of or running by an editor or something?
The thing about it is that they're not rough drafts. They are
miniature stories.
They are very, very finely crafted, and they're crafted to make you think that they're rough drafts. So how she writes this is deliberate, and the fact that she starts from a simple story, builds up to more complicated, longer stories, and then tails off to the end and just throws in different ideas. That's deliberate. That's a sort of illustration of a writing process, if you like.
Yeah, I think that making each of these stories more interesting, bigger, more detailed is actually a different story. I think, what was that story that had all the vignettes? And each one was like a miniature story, and they had dialogue, and there were detailed. Who wrote that thing? Submarine.
Yeah, I told you about You Anything, and you asked me for a Submarine Fleet.
Thank you, Anais. I'm like, submarine. Yeah. Shorthand. Anais.
Rescue me.
I think that story is what this story would have been if the story had been about the story. But for me, this story is not about the story. It is about story with a capital S.
No, I don't think it would have been the same exactly, because this story gives alternate versions of the same thing, whereas the other one was just giving different, like giving us flashes of different points in someone's life.
Yeah, I'm not saying it would have been exactly the same, but what I'm saying is it would have been about the story. If these stories had been, if we learned more about the characters, if there was some dialogue, if everything was fleshed out, then this story would have been actually about John, Mary, Marge, whatever his name is, James Dean,
Fred, yeah.
It would have been about those people. But this story was not about those people. This story was about the author and the process of writing story, which is a totally different concept, which is one of the reasons, I mean, this brings up a great question, because this is, to me, very experimental. It's very writer-centric. It's a story that I think they probably teach it because, like, this is huge for a writer to read. Like, it makes you think a lot about the process of writing. But for normal readers, how do you think this works? Remy, as a nonfiction writer,
no, I
did you
like
get something from this?
Oh, for sure, yeah. Okay. I said it from the beginning. I like this concept of because you know what it reminds me of? I think even in stories for teens or like horror stories or something where you like get to choose the ending and it's like, okay, skip to this page. Yeah, you want it to end like this, and so on.
Yeah, it did have a choose your own adventure feel
exactly.
to it. That's really funny that you said that because I actually did have a little bit of that. I was like, oh my goodness, it's like choose your own adventure.
Yeah, I think as a standalone piece, like I feel like if this is the only thing you've ever read of hers, that's a shame because she's actually so good at crafting stories with plot. I think it's funny that she's kind of like laughing at like espionage and revolutionaries because her Mad Adam trilogy is filled with that. All of her work.
Oh yeah, she's totally like laughing at herself. It's great.
Yeah, and so okay, so this is part of a short story anthology published in 1983. The anthology is called Murder in the Dark, and I feel like if you're reading Murder in the Dark and you come across this, you read it quickly, it's like a garnish to the collection. It's a little diversion, and it helps you understand the author more. It gives you a little flavor. But if you read this alone, I don't know. I mean, for me, it probably won't stay with me. I like it because I like Atwood and because I like her other work. But if this is it, I don't think it holds up. That's why it was in an anthology.
I think if I was a non-writer, I would have been very confused by it. I think part of the reason why I like it is because as a writer, I'm able to see and pick out a lot of the layers that are in it. But if I had handed this to somebody who is not a writer or not like exceptionally well-read reader, I think it might bore them quite a bit. How about you, Gerald?
I don't know. Is the short answer.
I think that's a very appropriate answer for this story, actually.
Yeah, I can't imagine how I'd feel reading the story if I wasn't a writer.
I'm still not even sure how to rate this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time I read it, I was like, did I like that? Second time I read it, I was like, what was it? Third time I read it, it's growing on me. And then I laid in bed and I thought about it, and I was like, wow, there was a lot to that little story, but it took me thinking about it.
It's interesting to listen to hear how you go about deciding the rating, because for me, I always start with a 6, which is the highest possible one, and then I look for reasons why I might deduct points.
Oh, yeah, I don't do that. Like, everybody's a 0. Everybody starts from 0. It takes a lot to get to 6. Like, I've got to be jumping up and down like an evangelist, wanting to shove this story under everybody's nose. The sky's got to open up. I need to hear harps sing. My views got to change, and my life is better for it. And I want to reread it multiple times.
So that's a bit telling about our personalities, too, right? Because you start from a 0 and I start with a 6. You're like telling me I assume the good.
Everything's crap until I prove the other way. So do we want to go ahead and rate this puppy?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, for such a short story, I don't think we can get much more into it. I think we've pretty much tried to dissect it as much as possible. Who wants to go first? Let's start with Rami. I'm curious. Rami?
Cuatro.
No.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
That is not bad, Rami. That surprised me.
Yeah, that surprised me too, because I'm giving it a 3.5, and I
Oh,
thought
wow.
I liked it more. Yeah.
Now that's even more surprising.
I know. Well, the reason I'm giving it a 3.5 is because like I was almost going to give it a 4, but what I'm realizing throughout our conversation is it's like a conversation piece about writing and about plot, but I doubt it's going to stay with us moving forward 6 months from now when we look back. We're not going to remember what happened because nothing really happened. It's I guess maybe I was hoping for more because I've read so much of Atwood that I'm just like, I want one of her great stories where crazy things happen. And so it's just sort of like it's fine, but it's not gripping.
Ooh, Anais said the F word. Fine. That is a death nail of fiction. Yeah, it's fine.
It's a garnish. Like in the anthology, you're reading all these stories, you read this, it helps build on what she's doing, but alone.
But now that you're saying this, I wonder how differently I would have perceived it if I had read the whole book that you're reading for the book club.
I think you probably would have liked it more because you'd see what she's doing in the other stories and you'd be like, hoo-hoo, oh, I understand you now, Margaret Atwood.
I think reading a lot of work by one author does tend to change the way you feel about the author. I still need to do my review for the Carver anthology I read. After doing that, though, I definitely plan to do that for other authors because it totally changes the way you see people's work. Mm-hmm. How about you, Gerald?
5.
Okay.
Really?
You sounded confused with that 5.
Yeah, because it was, I don't know, because I had 5.5 written, but it's not that memorable. It's not. I suppose I would prefer a story that was a story with a start and a middle and an end. But I enjoyed what it was, and I enjoyed how she wrote. So yeah, it's a 5.
You know what I'm thinking as everybody's rating? I'm realizing that if this had been Happy Endings, an essay by Margaret Atwood, it probably would have been a full point higher for me. I'm gonna rate it a 4. I like I said, if I was rating it as an essay about writing, it would have been like a 5, 5.5. But as a short story, I'm rating it a 4. I'm having a hard time with that 4 though, because there isn't really anything I don't like about the story. There isn't. It just doesn't feel like a 5 to me. It's interesting. It made me think about a lot of things. I don't think it's really accessible to a wide range of readers, which isn't necessarily a requirement for great fiction, but it is something to consider. I think that this is probably something I would read one more time, like, you know, later on down the line after I've read a couple novels, read it, have a chuckle. But I don't think this has been life-changing or I've learned anything that I didn't already know. Like, that's the other thing. Like, I know all this stuff. Now, that partially is because I write, but I feel like the ideas in this aren't necessarily novel or new in any way. So for me, I'm giving it a 4, even though I did genuinely enjoy it. But it took me 2 reads to get to that point.
Yeah, I think I rated it higher because I liked the arc of the piece. So from the small through the large and then back down to the small and just throwing in different ideas. I thought that was
yeah, I like that
well
too.
Yeah.
I did. I really, really did, Gerald. I loved those options and that arc, but it literally took me laying down and thinking about the story after reading it 2 times to realize I liked the story. At first, I literally didn't know how I felt about it. And for me, that's not a good sign. Like, if I read something, I'm either going to love it or hate it or be mad or be angry or be confused. But to just be like, I don't know is a problem for me. So, yeah. It was an interesting story.
Yeah, you can stick to your 4. It's fine.
Yeah, I feel bad, though, because I love Atwood.
Yeah.
And I genuinely like it, but it took me too much work to get to that point for me to rate it higher. So,
Okay.
what are we doing for next week?
Yep. It's I'm hosting the story. The story? I'm hosting the game. Gee, this podcast is right.
It's ruining you.
Yeah. I'll do that again. It's time to choose next week's story. I'm hosting the game, but what stories would you all like to read next week? We'll start with Anais.
I'd like to submit Wagon Toe by Paget Powell.
Maya?
I'm going. I want to read something by Hong Sung Yuan, and I'm alternating between Cranes and Shower. I'm going to go with Shower because that's the most famous of her stories.
Okay, and Rami?
Mine is called 3 Questions by Leo Tolstoy.
Ooh, I love Tolstoy.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Any of us can win, and I'll be happy.
Okay, so we've had a story about happy endings. The quiz is about not so happy endings. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the final words of some people before they died, and I'd like you to tell me who said them.
Wow.
Yeah, you see. Clever, huh?
Will it be multiple choice?
It will be multiple choice.
I sure hope so.
Yes, I will. So,
Otherwise, I'm just going to say how many death knowns.
Yeah. Right. I'll do it in the order that you're on my screen here. So Anais, first one is I shall hear in heaven, or there's 2 ones associated with this person. I shall hear in heaven, or friends applaud, the comedy is over. Was it either Beethoven, Mozart, or Chopin?
Beethoven?
Is the correct answer. Woohoo!
Nice.
So, Anais, and Rami. Maya.
Okay.
Die, my dear doctor. That's the last thing I shall do. Was it Lord Palmerston, Benjamin Disraeli, or Horatio Nelson?
What was the last one?
Nelson.
I'm going to go with Horatio Nelson because I have no idea who any 3 of those people are.
Yeah, a bit British-centric. It was Lord Palmerston. Rami. I have offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have. Was it Was it Vincent van Gogh? Was it Paul Cézanne? Or was it Leonardo da Vinci?
Da Vinci?
Is the correct answer. Neck and neck with Anais. Round 2. You see, I have them in rounds too. That's clever, isn't it? Anais. I'm bored with it all. This is a great one. Was it Teddy Roosevelt? Was it Winston Churchill? Or was it Woodrow Wilson?
Churchill?
Churchill is correct. I'm bored with it all.
Oh, I had it right.
I was like, who's the biggest grump?
Yeah, exactly. Maya?
Okay.
Lord help my poor soul. Was it H.P. Lovecraft, Bram Stoker, or Edgar Allan Poe?
Poe.
Is the correct answer. Rami, I hope I haven't bored you. This is a great one. I hope I haven't bored you. Was it Elvis Presley, B.B. King, or Joe Cocker?
Okay, I know it's not Elvis because he died on a toilet. Let's go with Joe Cocker.
It was Elvis.
No way!
I think that died on a toilet might be apocryphal, but...
Yeah, I think it's an urban legend.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But now we know more about what goes on in Rami's head when he's answering questions, so it's so good.
Okay. Round 3. There are only 4 rounds. Round 3. Anais, I die hard, but I'm not afraid to go. Was it William Shakespeare, George Washington, or Jackie Collins?
Jackie Collins?
No, it was George Washington.
Really? Washington?
Apparently, yeah. Yes, that sort of, it's that big statement, isn't it? It's a good one. Either the wallpaper goes or I do. Was it Rowdy Roddy Piper, Oscar Wilde, or Elizabeth Taylor?
Is that for me?
Maya, sorry, yeah, Maya.
Elizabeth Taylor.
It was Oscar Wilde.
Oh.
Yeah, famous one. And Rami.
Was he redecorating before he died?
That just sounded like such a diva statement. It had to be one of the two.
Yeah. And Rami. Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose. Was that Karl Marx, Adolf Hitler, or Queen Marie Antoinette?
Oh.
Antoinette.
Antoinette is correct. So Remy is 3 points.
Okay, do we have to ban him from these quizzes? Because he keeps winning. He's only been on the podcast, what?
No, it's tied. I'm tied with Anais.
Annie, you got them all right. Annie's got one wrong.
No, I got one wrong as well. I got Elvis wrong.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You got Elvis wrong. It's like, no, I don't win everything. I swear.
No, plus, I had a drought before I went on my winnings. You're forgetting it was a while before I submitted my first story.
Can I just say this quiz isn't meant to be terribly serious?
It's us, Gerald. It's all serious.
Final round. Anais, I have a terrific headache. Was that Groucho Marx, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or Karl Marx?
Roosevelt?
Correct answer.
Ooh, good, Annie's.
Oh, who said? Go on, get out. Last words are for fools who haven't said enough. This is Maya, sorry. Go on, get out. Last words are for fools who haven't said enough. Karl Marx, Groucho Marx, Harpo Marx.
Harpo Marx.
No, it was Karl Marx. And Remy, I can't sleep. This is a good one. Final words, can't sleep. Was that Tom Clancy, James M. Barrie, or Elmore Leonard?
I don't know who any of these. I'll go with the one Clancy.
Wrong. It was James M. Barrie, who wrote Peter Pan.
Okay.
Oh.
So there was a tiebreaker.
No, Anais won.
Anais won, yes. But I just want to read the tiebreaker. And It was Humphrey Bogart who said, I should never have switched from scotch to martinis.
That's awesome.
Right, final word. So what
that
are
is
we
a
reading
great
next
epithet.
Okay.
So, Annie's?
Yep. Next week we are reading Wagon's Hoe by Paget Powell. Before then, I have another story for our dear readers. Reader discovers literary Roadhouse, listens to an episode, then falls in love. Want a happy ending to that story? Leave a comment at literaryroadhouse.com and let us know what you thought of Atwood's happy endings. And for the happiest ending yet, you should also leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spreaker, then share this podcast with your friends. Until next time, read a good story.
Nice.